Ahoy and welcome back to Leia's Library. Find yourself a cozy corner, get yourself something nice and cozy to drink, and let's get started. Today we will be doing recommendations based off of other recommendations, kind of. Recommendations based off of other things. So I'm going to be recommending books based off of other forms of media and also other books. So it's one of those, if you like this, then you might like this kind of things. And let's hope I figure out how to formulate that nice and concisely so that this video can have a coherent title. Let's get into it. So I'm going to be starting off with book recommendations based off of different film and TV series. So first, because it was such a big hit, I thought I would go with Wednesday, the Netflix adaptation. So my recommendation for if you like Wednesday, if you really enjoyed it, you would probably also enjoy the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend. So if you like gothy, emotionally stunted and blunt protagonists surrounded by exuberant people learning to open up, you probably enjoy this one. Also, Nevermore Academy, Nevermore, meant to be. So I talk about this series a lot, but if you are new here, I'll give you a brief summary. The Nevermore series is about Morrigan Crow. She is what's known as a cursed child. That means that she is fated to die on her 11th birthday. But when her 11th birthday rolls around, instead of dying, she is instead whisked away to a magical world called Nevermore by a jubilant man named Jupiter North. And while she's there, she makes a lot of friends, she learns what having a family is like, and shenanigans ensue. This is one of my favorite series ever, and it has a lot of parallels to Wednesday, so if you really enjoyed Wednesday, you should try it out. I will say that Wednesday is it's like a YA. I know that's for books and not for TV shows. It's more geared towards teenagers, whereas Nevermore is for middle grade. So there is that difference. But so if you really like Wednesday, but like me, you were like, why is there a love triangle? Why is there any love interest at all? There's none so far in these ones. Okay, next is Studio Ghibli. So I actually have two different recommendations for Studio Ghibli movies. One is more of like your Kiki's Delivery Service, Spirited Away, but also kind of like Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, and Princess Mononoke. So if you like those Studio Ghibli movies, I would encourage you to check out A Snake Falls to Earth by Darcy Littlebadger. A Snake Falls to Earth is a YA magical realism fantasy contemporary. It has two different perspectives. One is Nina, a Lipan girl in our world, who's always sort of felt like there's something out there. She's very... she still kind of believes in the old stories that her grandmother tells her about the spirit world, and she feels very connected to those stories. Meanwhile, the other perspective is Ollie, who is a cottonmouth kid, cottonmouth as in the snake, and he lives in the spirit world, and like all cottonmouths, he has to leave his nest at some point, so he has to set out on his own and make himself a new home, which proves to be rather difficult for him. Ollie and Nina live two completely separate lives until a tragedy strikes and their lives cross in an unexpected way. So why I think this book ties into those Studio Ghibli movies. On the one hand, very much like Princess Mononoke and Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, there's a lot of environmental themes in A Snake Falls to Earth. It's very like environmentally conscious. Sort of like all of those movies. I guess maybe a little bit less Princess Mononoke, but there's less of an overarching plot, and it's more of kind of like an abstract storytelling focusing on characters. So very much kind of like Spirited Away or Kiki's Delivery Service, where it's just kind of like you're following Chihiro and Kiki as they kind of like do their thing. Although Spirited Away does have a little bit more of a plot than Kiki's Delivery Service. Anyway, I'm getting hung up on too many things. There are also, in A Snake Falls to Earth, there's also characters who have to leave home for the first time, and they're learning how to navigate that, and it's very scary at first. So it gives me very Kiki's Delivery Service and Spirited Away vibes. And there is the presence of characters who are initially very afraid, but learn to rise up against an obstacle that seemed impossible at first. So very much like Spirited Away, kind of like Kiki's Delivery Service. So yeah, I think it's that element of like abstractedness along with those like the abstract storytelling along with those environmental themes that just really pinged my Studio Ghibli radar. So I encourage you to check it out. Okay, on the other side, for like part 2 of Studio Ghibli movies, if you really like When Marnie Was Here or Whisper of the Heart, I would suggest you try reading Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Tsujimura, which is a YA magical realism about these 7 children in junior high, I think? Yeah, I think it's junior high, who for their own various reasons are not going to school. And one day they discover that there is that they can enter their mirror, and when they enter their mirror, they're in a castle. And the castle has these rules. That was loud. The castle has certain rules, namely that they have to be out by 5 p.m. Otherwise, they'll be eaten by a wolf. And the castle also has a hidden room, and if they find the key to that room, they will be granted a wish. So yeah, if you enjoy magical realism or like smaller elements of magic in an otherwise very grounded story, or kind of similar to When Marnie Was Here and a little bit Whisper of the Heart, characters who don't quite fit in for various reasons and like struggle with sort of day-to-day situations and kind of ultimately learning how to navigate that and how to cope with that, I think you'd really like Lonely Castle in the Mirror. I really liked it. Oh, I also wanted to be clear that I very distinctly meant When Marnie Was Here, the Studio Ghibli movie, because I know it is also based on a book, but I haven't read it, so I can neither confirm nor deny how accurate it is, or if you would like Lonely Castle in the Mirror because you enjoyed the book When Marnie Was Here. I have no idea. Okay, these next 2 categories, they are television shows, but they are also television shows that were adapted from book series, and I think either kind of work. I think either works, but one of them I haven't read the books for, but I'll talk more about that one when I get to it, because the first one is Game of Thrones, or the A Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin. And if you like that, I think you would enjoy the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. So the First Law trilogy, how do I even explain it? It is an epic fantasy. It is a grimdark epic fantasy about a cast of very morally gray characters coming together in order to accomplish a goal, but I don't really want to say what the goal is because you learn about it in book 1. I know that sounds very vague, but give me a second. So, if you liked Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire because of the epic fantasy nature to it with a wide cast of characters who are all very different from each other, if you liked it because of the grim and unforgiving world, if you liked it because of the fantasy violence and the fact that it doesn't shy away from gore, if you liked it because of all of the morally gray characters and how they play off each other, then I think you would very much enjoy the First Law trilogy. I feel like probably a lot of people have made this comparison, but I have never heard it, so it's new for me. I apologize if this is like the coldest of takes. Okay, this next one is a TV series based on a series of books, but I have not read the books, and I've heard that the series is not like the books. So this is kind of it's The Witcher. I've watched the series, the Netflix series, and I've played Witcher the Wild Hunt. So if you enjoyed either the Netflix series or The Wild Hunt, I would offer The Haunting of Elizabeth Cray by Chris Whitting. So if you enjoy The Witcher because you enjoy this notion of a world overrun by monsters with dedicated monster hunters known as witchers or witch hunters in the case of Haunting of Elizabeth Cray, then I think you would enjoy Haunting of Elizabeth Cray. And if you enjoyed The Witcher because of all of the monsters and you wanted more of the monster hunting, but you weren't as big of a fan of the overt violence and blood, The Haunting of Elizabeth Cray is a YA story. It is not an adult story, so the violence is toned down, but the horror elements are amped up. So there's also there's a wide variety of magical beings and creatures in The Haunting of Elizabeth Cray that I find really similar to Witcher the Wild Hunt. There are different kinds of witches and these different magical beings. There's a boy called the Devil Boy Jack, and it's never fully explained what he is, but he can kind of see the future, but his eyes are sewed shut. Yeah. I check it out if it sounds like something that would be up your witchery alley. Okay, now we're moving on to books. So, if you liked X book, I'm gonna recommend Y book. Starting off with the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. So if you enjoyed the existential dread elements of the Broken Earth trilogy, I have a whole video on how the Broken Earth trilogy gave me anxiety. So if you enjoyed that aspect of the Broken Earth trilogy, if you enjoyed the creative characters and different creatures, if you enjoyed the sci-fi elements of new planets, and stories about the lengths people will go to just to survive, I would suggest you check out Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which is a sci-fi that is set in the very, very distant future, where humans have had to abandon Earth, and now humanity is in search of its new home. So there are two different plans put into place. One is to try to terraform a new planet to make it as similar to Earth as possible. And while that terraforming is happening, there is another sort of group of humanity that is in search of a new planet that's already habitable. So it's split into two perspectives. It's split between the group of humanity that is searching for a new planet and the life forms that are starting to pop up on the planet that's being terraformed. But something ends up going awry, and instead of it being primates that sort of become the dominant species on this new terraformed world, it's spiders. Yeah, spiders. Spiders are main characters in this series, which that's pretty cool. Next is, this one might be a little bit of a stretch, but hear me out. If you enjoyed The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, I would recommend The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. Why? Because both of these series have sort of grumpy and untrusting main characters who will do everything to keep their family safe, even if it means risking their own lives. There's also a tournament aspect in both books. In Hunger Games, you have the Hunger Games, and in the Scorpio Races, you have the Scorpio Races. So what is Scorpio Races about? It is about this girl whose name is Puck. And she lives on this fictional island off the coast of Ireland. And this island is famous for its Koppel-ushka, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, which are, if you're familiar with Kelpies, they're essentially Kelpies. They are these sort of water horses that are just a little bit magical. but they're also incredibly dangerous and they are carnivorous. And every year on the 1st of November, they hold the Scorpio races. So people train pretty much all year for these races. They train with their kapelushkas. It is a race specifically for kapelushka. And these races are incredibly dangerous because the kapelushka are incredibly dangerous. And it often ends with several people dead. But this year, because Puck desperately needs the money, otherwise her family will be kicked out of their house, she is entering the Scorpio races on her pony, not a kapelushka, just her little pony. So yeah, on the surface, these stories are quite different, but they have a lot of similar themes, I find, and I find Katniss and Puck to be very similar characters. So I would check it out. Next, if you are a big Harry Potter fan, but you would like to not support transphobia, have I got some recommendations for you. My first one is probably pretty obvious for anyone who's been here before. It's Nevermore Again by Jessica Townsend. But also the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan, or Miss Peregrine's School for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. So all of these stories have magical children. They focus on the importance of friendships, and they're all adventure stories, and they have found families, and they're all just very, very fun, and they kind of like get a little bit more, they start out quite lighthearted and then get more serious as the series goes on. Nevermore and Percy Jackson are both middle grade, whereas I believe Miss Peregrine's School for Peculiar Children is YA, so keep that in mind. And yeah, and notably, none of these three series were written by bigots, so we love that, because what? Trans rights are human rights. Thank you. In a similar vein, if you really enjoyed the Percy Jackson series, I would recommend Zachary Ying and the Dragon Emperor by Shiran J. Zhao, which is a middle grade fantasy? No, it's not. I wouldn't say it's a fantasy. It's a middle grade mythology fantasy sort of thing. It is about Zachary Ying, who finds out that he was born to host the spirit of the first emperor of China, but something goes wrong when the emperor tries to possess Zach's body, and instead he ends up possessing Zach's AR gaming headset. And when Zach's mom gets kidnapped by demons, Zach is kind of forced to team up with the spirit of the first emperor of China in order to get her back, even if he doesn't entirely trust him yet. So yeah, this series, just like the Percy Jackson series, is really fun. It's like really goofy and lighthearted, but then at times like makes you go, oh wow. So it hits hard in all the places where it needs to hit hard, but then overall is just a very fun story that also teaches you about another culture's mythos, which I think is pretty cool. Both series are also very adventure based, and there's a strong focus on friendships. So yeah, definitely check it out if you are a fan of Percy Jackson. And the final one on the list is, if you enjoyed The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab, I would recommend these two books. Number one is Circe by Madeline Miller, which is an adult mythology retelling of Circe from Greek mythology. And you basically just kind of follow her very, very long life as she does things and as she's overlooked by most of the other gods in the Greek pantheon. The other is Kiki by Vaishnavi Patel, which is another mythology retelling, but this time of Kiki from the Ramayana. Kiki was born the only daughter of the kingdom of Kakaya. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Kakaya. So initially she's just kind of overlooked by everyone because they only care about what kind of a marriage alliance she can make. But we watch her sort of crawl her way to the top after she finds a magical scroll that bestows upon her some mild powers, but she still makes it all the way to the top by herself. But when she makes it to the top, and her world gets threatened by forces that she learned of as a child, and the path that she has chosen seems to go against the path the gods want her to choose. So she has to decide if her, defiance is worth it and what kind of a legacy she wants to leave behind. So if you like reading books about badass women who crawl their way to the top out of sheer defiance, I think you'd like all three of these books. I would say Kiki and Circe are the most similar. And then the Circe was kind of what I wanted. Circe and Kiki were kind of what I wanted The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue to be. I still really enjoyed The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, but not nearly as much as I enjoyed Kiki and Circe. And I think Kiki and Circe kind of fill in the gaps that Addie LaRue left behind for me. So if you really enjoyed Addie LaRue, I think you would extra enjoy Circe and Kiki. And those are all the books on the list for today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have any recommendations for anything that I mentioned down below, or just recommendations in general. I like a good recommendation. If you would like to find me elsewhere, you can find me on Instagram as Leia Like the Princess, or you can go to my little embroidery and art store, Moon the Cat Creations, or you can go directly to its website, moonthecatcreations.com. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, stay cozy.